All right, welcome everybody. It's Peter Carson here. We're going to get started now at top of the hour for our OntarioMD Azure website and Extranet webinar. As I mentioned, my name is Peter Carson. I'm the president of Extranet User Manager, also a SharePoint MVP and a partner seller with Microsoft Canada. All my contact info is up on the screen here, and we are going to be recording the session and posting it up on the site. So if folks aren't able to join live right now, you can certainly encourage them to go to our event site. There'll be a link there to both the downloaded presentation and the recording of today's session. Also joining on the line today is Peter Barrotti from OntarioMD. Peter, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, folks. As Peter mentioned, I'm also Peter. We only do these things with two Peters per background, of course. But I've been the director at OntarioMD for going on about 3 years now. And this was one of our major projects undertaken last year. So looking forward to talking a little bit about it with you.
Very good. Thanks, Peter. What we're going to do is start with a quick history of Extranet User Manager and Extranets in general, and then we're going to dive into the OntarioMD case study itself. So we've got this nice, pretty infographic we just done up recently. We haven't shared this in previous webinars, sort of the history of the Extranet User Manager product. It actually goes back close to 10 years now. It was something that we built as a custom solution for a number of different clients, actually won a number of awards through it. And about 5-6 years ago, started to productize it more as a standalone product. But about 2 years ago, we branched it out away from the Envision IT banner under its own Extranet User Manager banner and really started pushing hard from a go-to-market point of view and launching it out as its own standalone product. We've added in things like Azure B2B and Office 365 support recently, and this year we've launched out our new channel partner program. The version of Extranet User Manager that we're going to be showing today was actually built in collaboration with the OntarioMD project, and it hasn't actually been released yet. We're going to be doing a webinar in September for the new release that's upcoming. So we actually built the OntarioMD project and the new version of UM simultaneously, launched their site out live at the beginning of May, and continuing to work on rolling all that work back into the packaged product solution from there. OntarioMD is only one of many clients that we have around the world, lots focused in the North America area, but clients also in Europe and Australia as well. So for folks that aren't familiar with extranets, what I always like to do is start with just a quick background on what is an extranet. And really, it's a website accessible to users outside of the corporate network, so outside of your organization. It's not your staff, it's your partners, it's your members, it's your volunteers, donors. There's a number of different roles that people can play and a number of different ways it can be delivered out. It can be an extension of your public-facing website, and that's actually the example that we're going to talk about today with OntarioMD. Or it could be a portion of your corporate internet that you securely expose out, or it could be a purpose-built standalone extranet. So as we're talking about extranets, I mentioned a couple of these. There's lots of different roles of folks, and any one organization may have several different examples of extranet users that need to come in. In the OntarioMD case, we're really talking about the members, the physicians and their staff across the province of Ontario that need to come into the extranet. But it could be a customer portal, a vendor portal, supplier, maybe you're a not-for-profit or a charitable, where you've got donors or volunteers that come in. Lots of different scenarios that we've seen extranets deployed in. And typically when we begin a conversation about building an extranet for a client, there's a number of considerations or questions that we'd like to ask. And we'll talk later about the answers to these questions specific to the OntarioMD case, but the questions are fairly universal. Who is coming into the extranet? Think about that previous slide, the lists of people. Maybe initially it's just a supplier portal, but then you want to add customers in there from there. That's going to have an impact and a flavor to how the extranet works, depending on who's coming in. Does everyone see the same information? Is it something for secure publishing that goes to that broad group, or is it maybe a customer or supplier portal where you want to provide specific customer information for each customer that logs into the portal? Is there some sort of member database to interface with? Is there a CRM system or a membership database that we want to connect either the registrations or the invitations into? And how do people register? Are they able to self-discover the site and self-register, or is it an invitation only, where you know the people that you want to bring in? Take for example a board of directors portal. You don't need self-registration there. You know who the board of directors are. You can invite them in. Versus a customer portal, maybe you want customers to be able to self-discover, create their own account, and go from there. If you do have self-registration, how does that approval work? Is it automatic based on some information that they provide, or is there some approval process? Does it need to go to somebody within your organization or delegated externally to approve those new registrations? And at the end of the day, is it just the Extranet website that they're coming into, or is there other applications, other systems that they need to access as part of that as well? There's lots of ways to build an extranet, lots of different technologies. We're a Microsoft Gold partner, so we're focused on the Microsoft stack, and really that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Traditionally, most of our extranets are built on SharePoint or Office 365. Today's example is a little bit unique because the actual extranet that people come into is actually hosted in Azure. It's not actually a SharePoint portal at all, but a lot of the content is developed in SharePoint and then published out to that Azure website. And obviously, Extranet User Manager is part of the solution in terms of managing those users outside your organization that are coming into the Extranet. So let's talk about why you would choose to use Extranet User Manager. Why don't you just roll it yourself or use out-of-the-box tools from Microsoft? And it really depends on the technology platform that you're choosing to use from there. And we really target two very different Microsoft platforms. In the core, SharePoint is a big part of what we do, but that can be delivered either in Office 365 or on-premises in SharePoint. So if we're talking about Office 365, there are a number of ways out of the box to do external sharing, to use Azure B2B, which is a business-to-business invitation process to bring users into your SharePoint in Office 365. And the nice thing is if you use those tools, Microsoft consider those external users, and there's no licensing required. You can invite in as many external users as you want without needing subscriptions for those users. But there's some challenges. Using the Azure portal is not particularly end user friendly. It's probably not something you want to delegate out to your end business users. And the whole external sharing, while it's easier for users to use, from a governance point of view, it's got some challenges around permissions management and how you organize and manage that side of things. There's also no self-registration, line of business integration, or integration to on-premises Active Directory. So those are things that Extranet User Manager provides. It gives you that self-registration, the profile management, and probably most importantly, the opportunity to delegate, to say, you know what, we don't want IT to manage this on behalf of the business. We want the business to self-manage that. And they can do that through Extranet User Manager. Under the hood, we set that up in Azure AD and through B2B, so that's all seamless. We're using APIs from Microsoft to do that. We send the invitations out, which you can customize and brand. Microsoft still manages the login process, but we manage the whole group membership and permissions side of it. So it's a nice hybrid solution that still leverages the B2B, but makes it more usable from an end business user perspective. Alternatively, if you're running SharePoint on premises or you're using some other non-SharePoint system altogether, Extranet User Manager acts as what's called an identity provider. So we actually provide the authentication for the external users coming in, and we provide a single sign-on into SharePoint or other applications for that. It's not forms-based authentication. It's using modern technologies like OpenID Connect and SAML to do that single sign-on authentication. It's fully branded. We manage the whole login experience. There's self-service forgotten password reset, which is a very common ask from an extranet point of view. We support everything from SharePoint 2010 onwards from a version point of view, but also lots of other applications. We'll talk more about Azure websites that we're using today in the OntarioMD scenario, SaaS applications like Desire to Learn that we've integrated in with, SAP integrations we've done, custom applications we're going to talk more about today. And the ability to go beyond just doing the single sign-on, but even managing the profile updates in those other applications from an identity management point of view. That's all what Extranet User Manager can achieve. So let's have a look at some of the top-level features of Extranet User Manager. So if we start with branding is very important. Maintaining your corporate brand through the whole user experience, not just from a web point of view, registration, but all the end user pages that people touch, and even all the emails that they receive, from a welcome email as a new user to a forgotten password to approvals for new registrations that need to be approved and such. Those are all configurable through the Extranet User Manager product, so that your brand is consistent throughout all of that. One of the biggest reasons clients purchase Extranet User Manager, though, is around the delegation idea. This concept that IT really doesn't want to manage the accounts, and the business doesn't want IT to do that either. They don't want them to be a gatekeeper in them. They want to take control themselves. So the ability to delegate out to the business, to invite users in, to approve new users that have self-registered, or even delegate to the external organizations. We're going to see that again in the OntarioMD case, where physicians can actually invite their own sponsored staff from there and manage those invitations themselves. So that delegation concept is very important throughout the product. A single sign-on, we mentioned already, the ability to have users sign in once through Extranet User Manager and then be able to transparently go between SharePoint, other SaaS applications, custom applications and such, and have a single sign-on experience through that. And as I mentioned, we use OpenID Connect or WS-Fed to provide that single sign-on experience. Those are industry standard technologies. So if your applications are fairly modern, can support one of those two methodologies, then it's fairly easy to integrate that into Extranet User Manager. We have clients do a lot of different integrations to both commercial and custom-built applications. Multi-factor authentication. If you have extended authentication requirements where just having a username and password is not sufficient and you want to have a second factor of authentication, we support this through what's called Azure Multi-Factor Authentication Service. Basically what happens is when a user successfully logs in, based on rules, are you coming from a new IP address? Are you on a new device? Did you previously try and log in and your password failed? Or have you changed your password? Those are triggers to say, well, you know what, maybe we should do a second factor authentication. So if we see that, we call out through Azure, and basically it's literally going to call the user through a phone call or through an SMS text message to say, hey, I just need you to confirm that you are actually trying to log in here. So providing that second factor of authentication, they confirm that, the login completes, and then they're into the Extranet portal from there. So not all of our clients use this, but it depends on the, what's the security level of the information that's in the Extranet that they're coming into, but it's there as an option. And it's fairly cost effective. Basically, there's a transaction cost to Azure MFA that you pay, I believe it's 15 cents per authentication transaction that happens out to the external users. Home realm discovery is this concept of figuring out where do people need to log in. And typically it's different whether you're an external user or an internal user. The key though is that you want people all going to the same URL, to the same website address, regardless of whether they're staff or Extranet users. So what we do is we let you set up rules that define things like what are your internal IP addresses. So if we see somebody coming from one of those IP addresses, we can say, you know what, those folks are working inside the corporate network, they've got to be staff. So we're just going to take them through the staff login using Windows Authentication, and they don't even see the login form in most cases. They just go straight into the Extranet portal, and away they go from there. So that's a nice user experience for the staff. If you're coming in from the outside, you could be staff. We can use things like what email domain are they trying to log in from to still identify them as a staff user, or to say, you know what, we're using email address as the username. You are an external user. I now need your password as well, and we'll take you through the login from there. So it looks like a lot of steps there, but it's actually very seamless. And the idea is to make it as simple as possible for the person coming in, whether they're a staff member or an external user. Next is self-registration. So not every Extranet needs this. Like I mentioned, often we see portals that are invitation only, but I would say more than half of our clients have some form of self-registration on there. And everyone's different. They have different fields that they want to capture, different approval processes that they need to go through. So it's a fully customizable experience. The idea is that you can add and remove fields, so you may not want all of our out-of-the-box fields. You may have some custom fields that are specific to your organization that you want to add into the registration form. This is one of the big changes that we're doing in our version 4, is actually making it a lot easier to customize these registration pages. The goal here is that simple changes like just adding or removing a field, you still need to be a bit of a developer, but really all you need to do is go in and modify some HTML, add in the fields, name them appropriately, and everything will wire up to the fields in the database in Extranet User Manager from there. If you have more sophisticated needs, customizations and things that you need to do, there may be some back-end development involved in doing that. We can certainly do that work for you, or we have full developer guidebooks that will support your development staff. They can do those customizations themselves. A forgotten password. This is kind of required for any extranet. You want to have some sort of self-service ability for the external users to reset their passwords. Often extranet users are fairly infrequent. They may go 6 or 12 months without going to your portal. They come back. I don't know about you, but I've got a lot of different identities and a lot of different portals. Not everybody uses things like LastPass to keep track of their passwords. So we want a quick and easy way for people to be able to reset them. Basically what happens is you enter your email address. It sends you a one-time time expiring token in email that you click the link, you choose your new password from there. I mean, the key is that we never actually send the passwords through email itself. Those are plain text, they're not secure. So we send that token through, and then once it's been used or the time has expired on it, it's no longer of any use to anybody from there. We actually use the same method for onboarding as well. So when a welcome email goes out to somebody welcoming them to the extranet with their new account, whether they self-registered or they were invited, doesn't matter. They get that same idea of a one-time use time expiring token, and they set their password from there. As I mentioned previously, it works with SharePoint 2010, 2013, 2016, and Office 365. It's a very light touch install. It doesn't need to be installed on the SharePoint server itself. Basically, there's a PowerShell script that comes as part of the installer, and it installs a certificate into SharePoint and sets up the trust from there. So it's very light touch from that point of view. Likewise, on the Office 365 side of view, it gets registered as an application in Azure AD, and then it works from there. So it's, again, fairly light touch from that perspective. All of the pages are fully adaptive. They're built using the Bootstrap framework. So it's a modern CSS framework for building mobile-friendly applications. So whether you're an administrator using the admin pages or an end user going through the registration or going to your profile page, etc., all of those pages are fully adaptive and work equally well, whether you're on a smartphone, a tablet, or a full desktop. The application itself can be either hosted on-premise or we can host it in Azure on your behalf. As I mentioned previously, it doesn't need to be installed on the SharePoint server. You can if you want to. I actually recommend that you put it on its own IaaS server. It kind of decouples it from your SharePoint environment. Or if you don't want to manage infrastructure, we have a fully hosted version where we host that on your behalf. It's a secure multi-tenant environment, hosted in Azure. We have a third-party service provided 7/24 monitoring and remediation against that. So that's a great option if you're looking for a fully managed hosted solution as a whole. The product is fully multilingual. We're a Canadian company, so we've started out by providing English, French, and obviously that's expanded. We've had clients, I believe Kinross has done the most. They've got it in half a dozen different languages. So we provide resource files, which makes it easy to translate and update the text in the application. Okay, so that's background on Extranet User Manager. I want to spend the bulk of the session today actually talking about the customer case study in OntarioMD. So what I'm going to do is pass the torch over to Peter. Peter, why don't you give us a little background on OntarioMD as an organization first, and then this particular project?
Sure. So can you hear me, folks?
Yep.
Okay, just making sure I had two mutes on. So, yeah. So OntarioMD is a subsidiary, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ontario Medical Association, and the role we play in the provincial healthcare landscape has evolved over the years. Initially, we were largely the coordinators and I guess enablers of EMR adoption in the province for primary care physicians. And so how that manifested was effectively there were a number of funding programs and change management programs that we led to support for the physicians in their adoption of EMR technologies. Now, that is sort of where the old portal, if you will, comes in that at the time, you know, we deployed the Oracle WCI Stack portal platform that was really at the time intended to be an application services portal platform for physicians to come and leverage different resources that we would provide them, anything from you know, drug interaction databases to things like clinical best practice guides to a number of different applications, etc. But kind of over the duration of those programs, nearly 10 years, the technology platform and landscape changed along the way as well. So where we envisioned us providing resources through the portal to physicians in support of their clinical and practice needs. The products themselves, the AMR products themselves, began implementing a lot of the same capabilities and features. A lot of the services became commoditized and available publicly in different ways, where you used to be subscription services for certain medical journals and things like that. They started to become available publicly or through other means. So some of the infrastructure that we had built for our portal was, I guess what you could term, overbuilt for actual purpose at that time. But continued on for a number of years because it was still our corporate point of presence. It was still servicing a number of applications, and we had a very large user base of over 14,000 physicians that had registered along the way over those years. However, like all things, you have to consider modernization of that platform, the fit for purpose of that platform. And that's really what led us to the decision of looking for a modern technology platform to support our current and future needs. And that largely centered around still providing access to our custom applications, still providing resources that are used as part of their participation in our programs, and largely be the corporate point of presence for OntarioMD to communicate with the broader public.
Cool. Thanks, Peter. Now,
yep.
What I'd like to do here is come back to the questions that I asked at the beginning as we're looking at an extranet solution. And maybe if you can just take us through some of your answers here in terms of the considerations around your particular extranet. So we'll start with who's coming into the extranet.
So as I mentioned, our primary customer base, or the people we service, are primary care physicians. So they make up the majority of the user population that is coming into the OntarioMD portal via Extranet. Additionally to that, we run a number of different programs for things like software certification of certified electronic medical record systems. In that case, we have partners and vendors that participate in that. And then ultimately, we've got obviously internal folks, whether they're support or whether they're leveraging administration capabilities for some of our custom applications, et cetera, that are also using it. Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you keep going, Peter, thanks.
Yeah, so I was going to say, in terms of, what's the difference between these groups? So obviously, depending upon role and depending upon delegation, users may have access to different resources on the site. Some may have access to applications, some may not. Some may have access to sponsor additional staff. For example, physicians are typically fairly busy folks. They don't want to be in the business of personally approving every staff member and change that happens, especially in a big family health team practice, for example. So we have a concept of sponsored account manager roles that allow them to, in turn, basically act as the physician and delegate those other sub roles, if you will. So content is potentially one of the differentiators by role. Access to application is one of the differentiators by role, and access to administration is also a differentiator by role. So what do we do to actually qualify that first physician? I mean, everything begins with the physician in our case. So given that we are a subsidiary of the OMA, we leverage the registration database, which is facilitated by the OMA Direct. And so we've done some work to integrate Extranet User Manager through some APIs to actually be able to validate those, those particulars within the OMA database. As Peter mentioned, it's invitation only for the I guess sub roles of physician, but the physicians themselves can self-register, leveraging that OMA database integration, which confirms things like their personal specifics that are in that OMA, their OMA number, date of birth, things like that. After that, like I said, physicians are auto-approved through that validation, but they then turn invite, and like I said, most of the larger clinics typically go through a delegation model with a sponsored account manager. And then sort of lastly on is it just Extranet they'll be accessing or the other systems? In our case, we specifically provide access again to information resources. So there's some content that is only visible to users that are registered users and authorized. But most specifically, it protects our access to applications, our custom applications, which are hosted also in Azure, but only allow the pass-through once authenticated from Extranet User Manager.
Cool, thanks, Peter. So why don't you tell us a bit about the before and after? You know, we've talked about the before. You've mentioned about the Oracle WCI platform. Tell us more about where we've gone to and what that looks like.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we were leveraging about a 10-year-old platform that was both very expensive, very large in terms of scale of infrastructure, and given its age was also somewhat out of traditional support coverages. So we had special arrangements for support. So all those things combined, big, expensive, and old, was not something I was looking to hold on to too much longer. So we went to market with so the relationship that we developed here with Emergent IT was through a public tender. When we got into the evaluation of it, some of the things we really liked was alignment to the fact that we were already Office 365 users, that we were leveraging that most recently from our migration to that, probably about 6 months prior to the engagement of this portal refresh project. But it did sort of jive with our ethos of consistency of experience and keeping us within that ecosystem. We were also in the process of leveraging Azure for a number of different workloads. So yeah, I mean, when the proposal was put together, it seemed to hit on a lot of the items, and it was something that we were eager to undertake.
Very good. So let me dive a bit more into some of the technical side of things. So as Peter mentioned, we're using SharePoint Online, leveraging that existing Office 365 from a content management system and Azure from a hosting point of view. So let's dive a bit more into the Azure Web Apps side of things. And this is what Microsoft calls a platform as a service. And the reason for that name is that you don't need to manage that infrastructure. Yes, there is, in our case, a Windows virtual machine infrastructure under the hood, but it's all managed by Microsoft. So they do the patching, the availability, they basically manage those virtual machines through there. And there's things like auto scale and load balancing built in. You can actually have the infrastructure scale up and scale down depending on the loads that it's seeing. So if you see peaks and valleys in the loads on your website, for example, maybe you're seasonal with retail or your government and related to elections, things like that. There's a lot of different scenarios where you need to be able to scale that quickly up and down. And that's extremely easy to do with Azure Web Apps. So, I mean, under the hood, what we've got for OntarioMD is what's called 2 standard S2 VMs. And basically, those are 2 core, 3.5 gig RAM servers that are load balanced, patched, and maintained by Microsoft. So they take care of all that infrastructure side of the house for us. And at $217 per VM, so times 2, we're talking, what's that, $434 per month Canadian. That hosting cost is significantly less than, let's say, for example, actually putting up an entire SharePoint environment in Azure, which would be an order of magnitude more expensive from that point of view. So I've included a link in the deck. As I mentioned, the deck will be available on our site. You can dig down into the app service model in Azure and what all that entails. From an Extranet User Manager point of view, there's a number of ways that you can purchase EUM as well. We have both an on-premise and a hosted environment. In OntarioMD's case, they were looking for a fully managed, fully hosted solution. So we're leveraging the Microsoft hosting on the Azure app side. We're also leveraging our hosted version of Extranet User Manager. And we'll talk more about the technical solution, but we've got a number of different applications, not just the website, but things like the health card validator and other applications that are being provided through single sign-on through that. So that takes us into the enterprise version of Extranet User Manager because we have more than one app being authenticated. So that $1,070 a month covers the software license, the hosting, and the management of that whole EUM component of that. So net, from a financial result point of view, Peter, why don't you talk a bit more about, what's the outcome? We've been live for, I guess, about 3 months now on the new site, how that compares to the past.
Yeah, well, like I said, large, old, and expensive wasn't really something I was looking to hold on to much longer, and certainly the objectives of the project were very significantly met. I mean, just for, I guess, a point of reference, our operating costs for the year on all components of this of the new solution, including 365 licensing and everything else that goes along with that, is actually costing us less than just the yearly maintenance fees on the Oracle licensing and support. Let alone all of the infrastructure hosting, and some of this stuff was in managed services, and so these are orders of magnitude cheaper than our previous costs associated with this.
Very good.
So that allowed us to decommission and end some contracts, and that's led to significant savings for the organization.
Good to hear. Thanks, Peter. So let's talk more about what does that architecture look like? What have we built for OntarioMD? So what I have on the screen now is a diagram kind of illustrating at a conceptual view how this all hangs together. And on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got the Office 365 side. And as we mentioned, we wanted to leverage the existing investment OntarioMD already had in 365. We said, well, SharePoint Online is a great web content management system. Why don't we leverage it as the CMS for the public website? Now, we know we can't bring anonymous users into a website hosted in 365. That's not the model for that. So we needed a different place to do that. That led us to the Azure on the right-hand side to say, okay, well, let's spin up an Azure website and then build a publishing process that takes that content, whether it's web pages or documents or images that content authors upload into SharePoint Online, and push that over onto the Azure website. Once it's there, depending on security, anonymous users can see the bulk of the content there. Certain areas of the site that we've targeted as secure content, and you actually need to be an authenticated user in order to get into that. Now, remember, we don't have SharePoint on the Azure side, so all of the SharePoint features, things like search and rollups and such, yes, we need to rebuild that. We're actually able to leverage a lot of that through Azure. So things like providing full site search is done through the Azure search service sitting on top of that Azure website. And the way that we've built the site in SharePoint, we used a lot of modern client-side tools for doing things like rollups and such that we can leverage the same approach on the Azure website. They weren't built specifically to SharePoint, so we actually use the same technique both on the SharePoint side and on the Azure website side. So there is some technical duplication that we need to do some branding and some master pages and things like that for SharePoint and do a different version of that for Azure. But other than that, the vast majority of the infrastructure and the development is common to both sides from there. And the nice thing is that it's not pixel for pixel perfect, but I'll show you in a minute the authoring experience in Office 365. It's pretty darn close to what you see on the public website. So it gives a good experience for the content author being able to navigate through the site and ultimately see what it's going to look like once it gets published out onto the Azure side. And there's full content approval as part of that process. So as content gets authored or updated on the SharePoint side, there's customized workflows in SharePoint that decide some content needs to go to business approval first. Some of it goes straight to the communications team. Ultimately, communications needs to sign off on anything that's getting published. They complete that workflow, that marks the item as published, and that triggers our publishing process that pushes it across to the Azure website. So all of the document management and workflow power that we have in SharePoint, we leverage that as part of the content authoring side of things. So the end result, we've got a rich public-facing website on the Azure side, but then we also layer Extranet User Manager into that as well to say, we've got the ability to allow physicians to self-register. We can confirm that registration through web service calls back to the OMA to check the details there, and then provide authenticated access not only into the website, but also into applications as well. So Peter, why don't you take a minute, tell us about the OntarioMD apps that you guys built yourself, and then you integrated in with our Extranet User Manager product.
Great. So primarily, we have two applications that are leveraged by our user population. In fact, the first one listed here, health card validation, is, I would suggest, the primary draw to our portal, drawing about 6,000 to 7,000 interactions per day. And what it is a front end for validating health cards. Health cards are validated directly through connectivity to a Ministry of Health web service that actually contains all of the database repository for that particular patient and their health card. And we basically, forward some credentials, not credentials, rather, some of the details in terms of health card number and the version code. We don't transit names or any additional user details. It's really just number and version code. And then that's validated as a valid health card by the Ministry Web Service. Predominantly, it's used by, this service is available directly. In some cases, it's also available built into the EMRs themselves in a number of cases. But what we find is where clinics do not have other facilities to do that, and there are quite a few clinics across the province that either are still on paper, unfortunately, or don't have certified EMRs or EMRs with capabilities to do the direct health card validation. They depend on this in order to validate the patients that they're seeing. Now, as I mentioned before, part of our reason for being was the adoption promotion of EMRs in clinical practices. To support that, we have another application called the PA, which is the EMR Progress Assessment Tool. And basically, it is both a self-assessment and a guided assessment, leveraging some of our change management folks to determine a particular clinic's or particular user's maturity and use of EMR. And the idea is, there's different milestones and different points in time in their adoption that we check in with them and ensure that that maturity curve is, climbing the ladder to ensure that they're getting the most value out of their EMR. So I would say those are the two big drivers from an app perspective, and we have some behind-the-scenes stuff that are also app-based for metrics reporting and otherwise. But that is those apps, as Peter mentioned. They're Java apps that we previously had deployed in the old portal infrastructure. Obviously, we had to repackage and migrate to Azure Direct. So we're now hosting as opposed to as being part of that WCI infrastructure. They're now also running on Linux VMs that are in Azure, and we're leveraging authentication with SSO, as mentioned there.
Very good. Thanks, Peter. So what does the infrastructure look like? And it's a hybrid of Extranet User Manager hosted and OntarioMD in Azure as a number of different subscriptions. So on the left-hand side of the diagram here, as I mentioned, OntarioMD is selected to use our hosted version of Extranet User Manager. So we have a dedicated infrastructure in Azure to host that. So we've got a pair of virtual machines they're running multiple instances of Extranet User Manager used by a number of different clients. Those are isolated from each other. Each is their own IIS site in there. Each has their own dedicated Azure SQL database, so there's no cross-pollination of any data between tenants from that point of view. And then we're using Traffic Manager in Azure to provide load balanced access into that environment. And then on the right-hand side, we're actually responsible for management of the OntarioMD infrastructure related to the website itself. So OntarioMD was looking for a fully hosted solution. So we actually provide the Azure subscription to host the website itself and the publishing process that takes the content from the OntarioMD Office 365 environment into those Azure websites. Down towards the bottom right corner, though, the OntarioMD applications are the two that Peter just mentioned there, the health card validator and the EMR progress assessment tool. Those are hosted in their own Linux VMs, not part of the same subscription, but still connected into the same environment through OpenID Connect and single sign-on to Extranet User Manager. And the very bottom right corner is the OMA web services. Those are outside of OntarioMD altogether. Those are used by Extranet User Manager to do that validation to say, hey, is this a proper physician who's trying to register on the website? So we've talked a lot about the background and the technical architecture. Why don't we actually get into the meat of it and start taking you through a bit of a demo of what the application actually looks like. So let me flip over to my browser here. And I am going to start just on the live site itself. We're not going to do most of the demo on the live site, but I want to take you there just to begin with. So anybody can go to www.ontariomd.ca. This will bring up the Azure website that's hosted in that right-hand side of the diagram that we were just showing there. And all the content that we're seeing on the pages here is actually offered in Office 365. And then we can see at the top here, we've got the sign in and register links from an extranet point of view. What I'd like to do, though, is take you to our dev site, because I don't want to mess around with the production one, and actually go through some scenarios on this site. So let's start with the content publishing side of things. We have a lot of different roll-ups in the site, things like headlines, news, upcoming events, and such. Let's go into one of the headline roll-ups here and click on this particular page. So we've got things like full friendly URLs. We've actually brought that over from SharePoint. So the friendly URLs are defined in the term store, just like you would on a SharePoint site. And then we translate that over to the Azure website from there. And I've got a piece of content, a particular headline article here. What I can do is I can take the latter part of that URL, and I've got the actual Office 365 version of that site up and running in my browser here as well. So I'm on OntarioMDdev.sharepoint.com. Anytime you see .sharepoint.com, you know you're on an Office 365 site. So if I take that last part of that URL and paste it on here, that'll take us to the same site. So there's a one-to-one mapping between the URLs that you see on the public site and where those pages appear on the SharePoint Online site. So now I'm in that same article, and we can flip back and forth. You see there's sort of the live website view, and here's the Office 365 view. As I mentioned, it's virtually identical, except I've got a ribbon up at the top as a content author in Office 365. And I have all the standard SharePoint features in here that I can say I can come in and edit this page, and I get access to the full CMS of the SharePoint Online. So I can see here, what's the title for the particular page that we're on, the article date. So we've defined different content types. This is a headline news article content type. It's got a page content area. So let's actually just add in some sample content in here. We'll say, let's make this a webinar demo. We'll make that an H2 heading tag in there. And why don't we actually put some graphics in here as well. I'm not going to upload a new graphic. What I can do is just grab a picture from SharePoint. So it'll let me browse into the picture library of already uploaded images. I could upload net new ones or documents and things through there as well. Let me just grab this one here. I'll drop that in, and I can save that page. So the document's still checked out to me. I'm the one that's working on this particular one. And SharePoint gives me the notices to say, hey, it's still checked out to you. Only you can see it. You should probably check it in. So let's go ahead and do that and say, yep, I want to check it in. Now, I mentioned we need to go through a publishing process. We don't have the workflows fully turned on Dev. They kind of get in the way when we're trying to work from that point of view, so we've left them off by default. But I'm going to go straight to the publish here and go ahead and publish this. Now, if I wanted to go through the approval workflows, when I go to publish, I would get an option to submit for approval. It goes through auto emails to figure out, does this need to get emailed to the appropriate business group or straight to the communications team? They approve that workflow, then it gets published from there. At this point here now, it's basically ready and waiting to go over onto the Azure website. Now that takes a few minutes to go through. Let me give you a quick tour and show you what that looks like. So if I come over here, I'm just going to open a different window, different credentials, and go into the Azure portal. So I just need to sign in quick here. And what we're going to do is bring up the subscription for the development environment that we're working in here. So what I want to look at is the app services. So let's click on that here. And I think I've already got it filtered down to just the development tenants. We'll just see their app service plans. So I can go into the OntarioMD Dev one. And at top glance, I can see some stats of how this particular service is performing. So what sort of HTTP traffic am I seeing coming in and out, requests, response times. Some of these are higher. Most of them are around the 50 millisecond point of view. This is a dev environment, so it's getting cycled up and down fairly often through there. But what I want to do is come down to the web jobs. Web jobs are ways to schedule tasks to run in Azure, still against that same app service. And we've got a content publishing one here that runs every 15 minutes. So it completed 11 minutes ago. I can actually click on it and say, just force it to run right now because I want it to go through. It takes about 2 minutes to go through a publishing process. If I look at the logs for that, if I click into the publishing console, we can see it running roughly every 15 minutes through here. And it's currently running the one that I just launched there. So we'll let that run in the background. We'll come back to that in a minute to see the changes and updates that happen based on what I did on this side here. While we're waiting for that to happen, let's come back to the main OntarioMD site. And I want to take you through a bit of a tour from an extranet point of view. So there's two types of users, actually three, that I'm going to touch on today. The first we'll start with is an OntarioMD staff member. So let's say I'm working in the call center, an administrator. I want to do some work from the user base point of view. So first thing I need to do is sign in. All users need to come in through this. So we'll just wait for the login form to come up and then provide credentials in. There we go. So I don't want that account. I'm going to do my admin one. So this account basically has full rights into the system. So not only can it see all the secure content and such, it actually has access to back-end admin pages that the average end user doesn't have. We haven't put links to those in the navigation because we don't want non-admins to see that. So I'm just going to navigate directly to that spot. The first one I'm going to bring up is the user search pages. So normally in Extranet User Manager, you would go to what we call our landing and min application that lets you search and edit users and such. With our new version of UM, we can actually embed that functionality right into the application itself. So you don't actually leave the OntarioMD site, you actually do those admin tasks right through the OntarioMD site itself. And the way that's done is all of Extranet User Manager is now being built as a REST API backend, and we can then have front-end pages like this embedded into the application. So let's say I'm looking for physicians who are active. I can go ahead and search that, get a long list. We've got 1,300 in our dev site there. Let's do something obvious like searching for somebody with the name test. Here's some test users. I can bring up that test physician there and see all of their account information. So as an administrator, I'm actually able to update their profile. I could change their email address, their date of birth, all of their address and OMA number information is all displayed through here. Even their marketing options, groups that they belong to and such through here. So that's the admin side of it. Let's take a different perspective though and go ahead and actually sign in as this user. So the first thing I need to do is sign out here. I say, yes, I want to log out. And before I actually sign in as that user, what I want to do is just touch on the self-registration process. So it's a multi-step process for a physician to register. The first thing they need to do is provide their OMA number and their date of birth, and that goes through a verification. So we actually call out to those OMA web services to say, hey, is this a valid OMA number, date of birth that we're getting? Is this somebody that's registered before? Yes, it's valid. No, they haven't registered. Okay, we're going to let them proceed in the process. And they'll get to a second step where they enter in their email address, some of their profile information, and they complete their registration from there. They then get a welcome email with a link to set their password, and now they can log into the site. Now, I've already done that for that test physician that we've got, so let's go ahead and go to the sign-in page. Now, let's say it's been a while since I've logged in. I don't remember my credentials. I can click the forgot password, enter that email address, and I'll actually get an email with a link to reset my password. It's got I believe, a 2-hour expiry. It's configurable. Yeah, so we've set a 2-hour on this particular implementation where you can click that link and set a new password from there. It doesn't actually change the account. So even though I've requested a forgotten password email, I'm still going to proceed and go ahead from a sign-in point of view. We'll have a look later at that email that comes through. So now I'm logging in as that test physician 1. So this is somebody that's provided a valid OMA number, has gone through that validation step, has authenticated their email, and logged into the site. So we see here at the top, welcome test physician, and I can go into my account from there. I'm actually curious whether this is done. Let's click on that link. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So remember, I was in the content authoring side of things. I added the webinar demo and the image. That's now gone through the publishing process. So if we look back at our dashboard here, it finished 3 minutes ago successfully. The publish has gone through, and we actually see that content updated. So whether it's net new articles that they've created, documents that they've uploaded, changes to existing, all that work gets done on the SharePoint Online side, and then every 15 minutes that gets pushed across once it's been approved through the workflows onto the live site from there. Okay, so let's actually come into the My Account section here. So I can see my profile information. Now, one of the things is that we don't actually want physicians to update their profile information directly in the OntarioMD site. We actually want them to do that over on the OMA side, because that's the system of record for physician information. So if their name has changed, their address has changed, they should really go to the OMA and update that information there. If they've just done that, because there is self-service facilities on the OMA to do that, they can come back here, click this refresh from OMA button, it'll call those web services and get those updates and bring them across. Alternatively, if they don't do that, there is a nightly process that goes and looks for changes from the OMA and updates those profiles from there. The only thing that the physician can change is their email address. If they've changed their email, they can put a new one in there. It will actually send emails to both the old and the new email address, so it'll inform them in case somebody maybe got access to their account and switched their email on them, that that's happened, and they should be aware of that from there. They can also choose what marketing information they want to have provided to them from OntarioMD, so they can opt in or out of a variety of different newsletters and email promotions through here. And then the last section is around secure services. So this comes back to the application side of View. If we look up at the top right here, we've kind of lifted a little bit from Office 365, this app launcher concept. If I click on this, it'll show me the apps that I have available as this test physician. Now, when I registered this physician, I didn't provide what's called a secure services PIN. This is an additional security feature where they need to provide this PIN that comes from, Peter, does that come from the OMA or does that come from the Ministry of Health?
That's from the OMA.
From the OMA, okay, thanks. So if they've got that PIN, they can enter that in. That is actually the trigger to say, hey, I'm set up for the additional app of health card validation. So because this particular user hasn't gone through that yet, that health card validator doesn't show up as an app through here. I have the ability to say, you know what, I now have a PIN, I want to put that in, I can save that. Again, it goes through that validation process back to the OMA. If that's all good, that would put them in the role that then provides the health card validation app through there. Now, Dev is not wired up. I can't click on that EPA progress assessment publicly. It's private, internal to the OntarioMD environment. But what would happen normally is when I click that link, it would launch that Java Linux application that we were discussing previously, and through single sign-on, it would just automatically sign me right into that application. That's all happening through the OpenID Connect features in Extranet User Manager. Now, as a physician, though, I have the ability to do more than just manage my own profile. I can actually invite in sponsored users. As Peter B. mentioned, physicians are busy folks, and they don't really want to manage all of the staff within their practice having access into things like Health Card Validator. So we can come into the sponsored user section here and actually see what are the lists of sponsored users. So we've got an A1 test account that's been set up in here as an admin staff, and I can actually invite in additional users through here. So basically, I provide the profile information of the person that I'm going to be inviting in, who is the sponsor, and I'll get into some more complexities around that in a minute. What role, are they administrative, are they nursing staff, what have you, what's their profile information, their email, and also how are they going to be validated. We actually require that you provide a phone number and either do a phone or an SMS validation. So we're actually using the same Azure MultiFactor Authentication that our core product uses as part of this custom invitation process. And what will happen is the person that gets invited in receives an email saying you've been invited as a sponsored user. When they click to accept that, they're either going to get a phone call or a text message that they need to respond to confirm the validation, and then they can continue with either associating that with an existing account they already have or signing up for a new account on the OntarioMD site. Because the reality is often, administrative staff may work for multiple different physicians, so they can actually be sponsored for different physicians. And when a physician invites somebody in, they can mark them to be what's called a sponsored account manager, which means that person that just got invited can now invite other people on behalf of the physician. So this is where this dropdown comes in. Let's say I was actually signed in not as a physician, but as an administrative staff that's working for multiple different physicians. I could decide which physician I'm then inviting more people into. So it's a little complex when I explain it, but the idea is that this delegation happens not only to the physicians, but to their staff out from there as well. So I go ahead and send the invitation. That'll send the email out from there. Let me just go back. I can revoke invitations as well. So I can take an existing user pull up their information. I can either change their role with me. Maybe their role is different through here. And maybe now I want to make them a sponsored account manager. I can update them, or I can revoke their sponsorship to say that person doesn't work for me anymore. Maybe they still work for another physician and they still need access to OntarioMD, but not on my behalf because they don't actually work for me. So that's a quick run through of how the delegated user management works here, and you can see it can be adapted for a variety of different scenarios through there. Some of the other things you probably noticed, there's this alert that keeps showing up on all the pages. That's actually part of the publishing process. If we come back to the OntarioMD SharePoint side, let me just come back to the site contents. We can actually see in SharePoint Online, there's a number of different lists and libraries that drive the content through here. So we've got things like articles and documents and certifications, which are all provided for the content authors to be able to update content through. And we can see alerts here, one of them as well. So if there's a notification they need to get out to all physicians and their staff, they can actually put an alert in through here. They can schedule when it should show up, when it should come off, and what its message should be from there, and whether it's a high priority or just a normal alert through there. Some of the other content that we see through there, if I come back to my site contents, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different roll-ups. So as you go into different parts of the site, let's say I go into EMR certification. So one of the, the main mandate of the OntarioMD is around adoption of electronic medical record systems. So what's the list of certified EMRs that a practitioner can draw from? So we can come down into the details here and actually see a list. There's actually quite a few different EMR vendors through here. We've got 17 in the dev environment. I think the list is longer on the production. So it's got all the details around the particular offering, the vendor, its certification status and such. That's all actually driven through this EMR certification library here. So as a content author, they upload up documentation related to each EMR, and they tag it with a variety of different metadata, which then drives how it appears in the list here. So as a content author, I don't need to maintain this list structure here. I simply upload a document, tag it appropriately, and all of this roll-up happens automatically as part of the content authoring. And that's true whether I'm on the SharePoint side or on the public-facing website. There's lots of other examples of similar lists as we go through different reports and job postings and tenders and such that are all presented out through that same sort of interface. So we don't have time today to go into all those details, but it gives you a sense of some of the complexity behind the hood and how this is all working. I mentioned we're using Azure Search for the searching. We're using the friendly URLs from SharePoint. It's a number of different features that we built in and provided as part of that. We're almost at the top of the hour. Not sure if we had questions as we were going through there. I forgot to mention you could post questions as we were going through. I don't think there's anything that is outstanding from that point of view. So let me just flip back to the PowerPoint deck here. We included a couple of slides just so you could see some of the internal pages that I've shown here because you would need credentials in order to come in to see that. So they'll be part of the uploaded deck that we've got available for download. We should have that up by tomorrow on the site. And Peter, let me just turn it back to you. What I'd like to wrap up with just some of the stats around what we're seeing in there and how things have gone since the go live at the end of May.
Yeah, so as Peter said, we went live at the end of May 28th, and successfully we were able to migrate the 14,000 previous portal users with, if I'm not mistaken, roughly 10,000 of those having come back since. A lot of the 14,000 were potentially aged accounts as well. So rather than, cut ourselves off, we decided to migrate the largest population. But we've had, like I said, about 10,000 unique users since the migration. On an average, we're getting about 7,000 users per month accessing it. We've had over 100,000 unique page views since go live. Like I stated before, the primary reason for visit is access to our custom apps, specifically the HCV tool as the largest driver. And what we're seeing with the new sort of improvements to our mobile experience, we're seeing that climb up a bit. I mean, it's still fairly low versus the overall population. That's likely based on the fact that the primary use of the site is in the clinic setting. There's not much, on-the-go access to this, but we are seeing an increase in tablets and mobile devices. I would say it's about 7% mobile devices and 3% tablets of that mobile split. And we're looking to improve that.
Cool. Actually, this is a new nugget I forgot to mention, Peter. I was actually playing around with Power BI a bit as well. So I've actually linked Power BI into the Extranet User Manager database for your prod environment, and we can bring up some quick charts like what is the split of user type by both their status and their type. So yeah, we can see here, physician is the primary one, or a little over 16,000 active users in there currently, and we've got about 3,000 sponsored users in there. Some staff and partners, vendors, nurse practitioners in there as well. So I'm actually keen to do a little more playing around on the Power BI side. I think there's a lot more analytics around login history and activity and things like that we can draw in from that as well.
Well, as you know, that's one of the reasons we got access to that same UM database. We're going to be doing some of that correlation as well on our end. So it's good to know.
Cool. So that's basically the end of our presentation. Just want to let people know about some upcoming events. So it's not up on our site yet, but we're going to be doing a webinar September 14th around the new V4 release. So this is the version that we worked together with OntarioMD as we were building their site. We're putting the finishing touches on that and getting ready to get into QA later in August, and we're looking at a September release on that. So we're going to do a webinar talking about the new features, how that all hangs together for September 14th. Also coming up, we're going to be out in Seattle, August 10th and 11th for Point Fest, and then again December 7th, 8th in Chicago for that conference as well. We have some other events coming up, so as always, have a look at our event page on our Extranet User Manager site. So look at that, we're right on the dot at 2 o'clock. So I want to thank Peter Barrotti from OntarioMD for joining us today. It's been great from a customer point of view working together on the project. And want to thank all our attendees, and we'll send out an email tomorrow once we've got the recording up there, so you can pull that down and have a look at that if you've got anything additional. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Peter. Take care.